It's so fun to always have you on. And Rebecca and I have had the privilege of being friends with you and Zach and your family for many, many years. We're probably coming up on a decade now.
It has been.
That's a long time.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
so we've seen your marriage up close and personal, and we have so much respect for you and Zach, and also your parenting and the ways in which you're raising kids. You have adopted children. I mean, you've kind of run the gamut on all the different ways in which to
Yes.
be faithful as a parent. And so today we want to get into a little bit of
I know.
how does that work? How's it worked for you? What are some of the lessons you've learned?
Yeah. In fact, you have a wedding this year. So I'm real excited to when I was just brainstorming, I'm like, there's so many conversations we've had personally offline. And I was just thinking of all the different things I'd love to ask you on air for people to hear, because I know there's a wealth of wisdom, obviously, that you bring. But I was really curious where we are right now is just launching kids well. And I just think this is a topic that we don't always hear. We're like in the trenches. We talk about that, maybe those early years, maybe middle school. But as you kind of think long game, long haul, you have done this. You've done this beautifully, and you're still in the trenches and you're still launching well. And I just thought, let's just start there. Like, when did the thought cross your mind? Like, for us, we're like, we have 52 Saturdays left before Pierce goes to college. Like, when did it really hit you that, you know, wow, our oldest is about to leave the nest, and what do we need to make sure that he has in him before he goes? And kind of, where is the framework for when you guys started thinking about that and you and Zach talking about that?
Unfortunately, I think I carried the idea of my oldest Connor going to college all of his childhood. I thought about it way too much. I'm so futuristic, my brain. And so I always dreaded it. And
Mm,
especially through high school years, I just felt like we were on a downhill slope and life would be over and our family would change forever. And certainly there are parts of it that did. But I really regret how much time I wasted dreading that, because these have been really fun years. He just graduated from Texas A&M this last week. Of
amazing.
course, Kate came home with him. She's doing online Liberty, and she's going to graduate in actually next summer, and she's getting married this year. So all of a sudden, I'm on the other side of my first two being away at college,
Yeah.
and so I look back at how much time I feared them leaving, and I
Mm,
regret that. So that's one thing.
mm,
Second of all, I think there was a sense that there would be an end to parenting.
mm.
I
Yeah.
haven't gotten to that yet. I definitely our relationships have changed certainly, but we are not done. I mean, we are still a huge part of their life, and praise God, like they come back to us and ask us questions all the time. Now we are no longer their authority, right? Like, I mean, one's getting married, one just graduated college, but because we have a strong relationship, we still get to speak into their lives. So I remember telling Zach one Saturday, probably before college was done, you need to go teach Connor how to change a tire. You need to go teach Connor. I was telling him all these things that he needed to know, thinking he's about to leave and he doesn't know how to do all this stuff. The funny thing was, he actually did. My uncle Tony, who y'all know well, had taught him out at the ranch, all kinds of things I didn't realize. But it turns out like that there's still time to learn things. And when they need you, it's amazing how fast they call. It's amazing how fast they enter back in. And so I think that's one myth about launching kids, is that now you're just out of their lives and you can't teach them anything anymore. But I do think, I remember when Connor was in middle school, I believe 8th grade. He had just passed me height wise, and he was a punk, and he would admit it. He's not surprised that I would say that. He was very difficult to parent. And I remember one day deciding, we were actually in church, and I said, stay back. And I looked at him and I said, hey, I'm not going to be your authority anymore. I'm going to be beside you. Your dad is really going to play that role of disciplinarian, and I'm going to be beside you, encouraging you. And until that point, we had been fighting like cats and dogs. And what happened
Mm,
at that point, and I think it's different for every kid and every parent of when it shifts, but
mhm.
there has to come a time where you go from over and authoritative over that kid to beside that
Mhm.
kid. And
Yeah.
mine happened earlier than I would have thought, just because of the nature of how strong both of us were. And just, I didn't feel like it was my place anymore. He was just bigger than me. And it wasn't working. It wasn't working anymore. And I think
Right.
every parent has to decide when that is, but it needs to happen before they go to college, where you really step back and you trust them and you demonstrate, I believe in you and I'm here for you, but I'm not going to have my thumb on top of you anymore.
That's such a good point.
Yeah, I think that's the hard one to learn, right?
Yeah.
We just launched our son to college, and so this last year was our first experience. I remember how sad it was. Like the day he's, you're saying goodbye and not sure, does this change everything? I think it's been reassuring this year to see what you have said so articulately play out, where it's like, no, the relationship's still there. There's
Yeah.
still a joy of seeing one another. There's lots of conversations. We're still walking through life together. There's just a little bit of distance, but you do learn a lot by just letting them go, and you see, and they need that too, to just see what they're made of. Like, do these wings work? Kind of like when the
Yeah.
bird gets out of the nest. Like, you won't know till you're pushed out, and then that reveals all kinds of new areas. So now we're going into summer, and I've got like my list of things. It's not changing a tire, but it's working on a few areas that I saw show up this year in his life that I'm like, hey, he could probably just use some more conversations that we never had about that, and we're going to try to be intentional with that time. With your daughter, I mean, she's getting married, right? I mean, so that's a whole new level of launching.
Yeah.
And how old is she? And what is
Yeah.
this with girls seeming to get married? They're going back. Rebecca and I got married.
I know.
She was
I was
22.
20. I had just turned 23.
I was 22.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
So that at the time was a little more
That felt
normal.
old. No,
Oh, yeah. Now,
I
no,
officially
no, no.
been
It's,
engaged to somebody else at 21 for a
When
minute.
did you get married, Jenny?
I mean,
How old were
that's
you?
the problem. And one thing I was going to say, I'm so afraid that the apples are just not falling very far from the trees. Like we're very much reliving our young years because so Kate is marrying an older guy, so he's graduated from college, but she's only 20. And it's just wild because I was only 20. Zach was only 20. So we actually had more school than they have left. But and it's one of those things as Christian parents where, we really believe in them. We're watching them try to pursue purity and faithfulness, and it's just hard to get in the way of that. I mean, certainly we have asked all the hard questions. They've done premarital, they've done all the work to make sure this is wise. But, I think they're ready. Kate's always been more mature than her peers, I would say, in a lot of ways. Some ways not. But I do think that they're ready. And so, whatever that means, we just grew up together, Zach and I. Like we got married, and then we had to get counseling, and we had to figure out how to live as adults, and we had to figure all that out married. And some people figure it out first, and then they get married. That's probably easier. But for us, it worked. And we had a hard first 5 years, but I don't regret that. And in so many ways, those years shaped us more than
Yeah.
even the good years.
I would agree. I would agree. We had Cade 3 years in, so that was still like, whoa, this was kind of our first big event of crisis moment. Like, how do we navigate not only parenting, but parenting a special needs child? And I was 26 and you were 25. I'm like, I feel like we're still kind of kids ourselves. And yet I can't fathom like what that did for us in like forging unity, like just that dependence that like we're one in this together. We had this conversation last week actually because we've been scheduling some of these interviews ahead, and someone mentioned this idea of that when we marry young we learn together, and when you marry later you kind of have learned something separate. And so it's not that one is better than the other, but they are uniquely different in that when you're learning together, you can both look back on that memory and be like, hey, do you remember that time when I threw a piece of cheese at you in the kitchen and then stormed around their apartment complex? And just like kind of laughing about what maturity just does. Like you grow up together, and that's good too.
So Jenny, you wrote "Find Your People," and I know that has been so well received by so many of us who want to have deep and rich and lifelong community. How do you see your family in the role of finding your people? Obviously, you're writing as well about friends and community, but how important is it that your kids, along with you as parents, feel like you've got this bond that really stands apart from what you're experiencing with your other friends? And how can parents cultivate that? Because in these teen years, it can feel like the kids just want to push away, push back, find their own footing on things, be independent. You can feel rejected as parents, like you said, like, do I come alongside? Am I still the authority? It's a confusing season, but I know you're seeing some of that play out now in your life that, hey, we got through those hard years. I'm feeling the find your people. These are my people. How do we see clearly a vision for that, even during some of the hard years?
Well, Zach and I always say you've got to start with the end in mind, that you've got to know what you're trying to produce. And ultimately, these are the three goals we were trying to produce. We wanted kids that knew that God liked them. We wanted kids that liked God, and we wanted kids that liked us, and that knew we liked them. If I'm going to add one more, that would be it. Like we wanted healthy them to walk out the door and go, my parents like me, we like them, like that was a huge goal of ours. Well, you're going to approach parenting very differently now. That doesn't mean I needed them to like me when they were in sixth grade and they were being a punk, right? Like that was not the goal at that time. But I also knew that I'm going to make decisions so that if I'm strong and disciplined with my kid, they still in the end see it as a good thing. We were strict with with social media. We were strict and are still with our youngest, with phone, with what they got to watch. The joke when Connor went to college is, "Mom, I missed all of my childhood's cultural moments. Like I didn't get to see any movies. Like I don't know all the quotes everybody's saying in college." And it's, we were protective, but we always, we cultivated relationships from the beginning. There was a sense that once our kids could talk, they were going to be in relationship with us. It wasn't
Mm-hmm.
people to control. It was people that we were a team, and we really tried to continue to like each other. We had very strict rules in our house about the way you talked to each other and about each other. One time, I remember my son was gossiping about my daughter to his friends, and I heard about it. Probably one of the most, like, he's never gotten in more trouble at that point in his life than that. That was a huge value to us. We take care of each other. We are the safest place for each other. And so I think it built a culture where our home was fun. Our kids liked being here. Our kids liked bringing their friends. Now that is not to say we didn't have moments and even seasons where we were distant because of choices they made or because of just their attitude. Well, I'd say middle school for everyone was just a little sketchy. Like those are not
Yeah.
our glory years for any kid.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think overall they walked out and said, we like our home, we like our family. And that's a hard thing to know how to achieve. But I think, I think we can tend to live as if our children are a burden, even from the time they're born, rather than these are your future friends. Like these are the people you're actually going to enjoy most in the world one day, probably or hopefully. At least some of them, right? Like some of them,
Yeah.
That's a great
they're,
perspective.
I don't know. One of them right now, I'm about to still like, "Oh, are we ever going to enjoy you?" But no, we do. We delight over them. But it is just, it takes that kind of vision that this is worth investing in, and you don't want to just lose them. So I would be a parent, and I know there's a million ways to parent, and honestly, it really does depend on your kids. Like every kid is different. And I would say, even in the four kids we parented, we have to do it differently for each one of them. But in general, I fought for my kids. So when they would pull back, when they wouldn't be sharing things, I would take them to, a date, and I would get them to open up somehow. And every kid, it took different effort or work to make that happen. But I felt like that was the priority for us, is knowing what's going on in their life. There were a million times I had to keep my mouth shut because they would come in and tell me everything, and I would just be freaking out inside. Like I cannot believe that just happened. And yet you got to play it cool. So, and again, we punished our kid. I'm not saying we weren't strict. I'm just saying we built a culture where they felt known and felt like they could have a relationship with us
Yeah.
along the way.
Well, and that's huge, right? Keeping those lines of communication open. Not and I like that you always use the phrase I like you. Obviously, you don't you're that's intentional. You're not just saying that we love them and they love us back. It's almost like the like is extra, right? It's like the assumption is that you love because,
Yeah.
you love your kids and they love you back. But it's easy to kind of say of course I love you, but I don't like you. And that like, if it's I don't like you, is such a rejection. And especially it it's when you like someone, it's like the encounter is pleasant, like the whole experience is pleasant, right? And it feels optional in some ways, whereas like you can't unlove your family, but the like part feels optional. And so when you get to add that on top of it or layer it, then that's where there's play, there's fun, there's intimacy. What are I have two questions. I have a lot of questions, but what are ways that you kind of like just rhythms as a family that cultivated that when they were younger, like that helped influence them liking one another?
So we are not very disciplined in our house. Like that's not our strength. We have a lot of fun, but we aren't disciplined. And so we, rather than feel bad about that and try to have a daily devotional or weekly, family meeting or anything like that. Anytime we tried any of that, it never lasted or worked. So we built experiences. So we
Yeah.
would, we still to this day we had our restaurant and our table that we went to whenever, I would say at least weekly. And everybody knew, okay, we'd text and we'd say, go to so and so, and they knew right where we'd be sitting and we could all meet there. And still that happened even yesterday. And the restaurant knows like, okay, this is their table. And we really were intentional about building a specific place. We were so poor. My husband was a pastor, and my kids were expensive. And so we just didn't have a lot of extra money. So we made friends with this bed and breakfast in Green and it was just about an hour and a half away. We couldn't afford, to go to a lake house or a beach house or anything like that when our kids were young. But we would go to this little bed and breakfast. It was like $120 for a night. And we would just go for a night sometimes and float the river. And we did the exact same activities. I think something about regular memories that
Mm-hmm.
are frequent, they build a really happy thing in kids' minds. And so that was something we did. We also are big about, we are the priority. We fight to be the priority for our kids, and it wouldn't surprise them. So we would say things like, okay, Friday night is family night or whatever. Typically it probably wouldn't have been a Friday night, but we sometimes it would be a weekend night. And and they would just know they're not going to see their friends, they're not going to see their boyfriend or girlfriend, like we're going to be together. And they were okay with that. They sometimes they threw a fit about that, but we just required it. It was, if we're going to have time together, we are not going to feel bad that you're going to miss something. Like this is important. And I would say too, what I did throughout, and I still do this, is I mean yeah, this is going to be controversial, nearly what I'm about to say. Um, we we think family is very important, and anybody that's read Find Your People knows that I studied villages, and that families really rarely left the place that they were born unless they were, went on a specific mission. And again, we've always told our kids, if you're called to the mission field, we are going to be the biggest fans of you. But you don't move to a place because it's a cool city. You don't go somewhere else because you want to take a better job. You live somewhere because of the people that you love and the people that love you. And so we've built a culture in our family of family matters. I remember the first year Connor was at college, and granted, it wasn't Liberty, it wasn't very far, and he was driving into a place near Dallas, and going to a ranch of a friend's. And so he was about an hour away, and it was Mother's Day, and he didn't come. And this is where a lot of people are going to really judge me, but you got to understand it's in the context of a relationship that is healthy and strong. And I'm not codependent on my kids. But I also was like, you know what? If this is the way it goes, where they don't prioritize seeing me on, I'm going to be a bitter person in 10 years. So I called him and I said, listen, it's fine. Like, you've already made this decision, you're doing this, but you just need to know that that hurt me. And you need to know that it's Mother's Day. I birthed you. You're an hour away. It would not be that hard to come see me. Now, so many people are judging
Oh,
everything
wow.
I'm saying right
No,
now.
100%.
But
I think
I
Me and
also was
Rebecca would
like,
do the
I'm
same.
not going to be,
absolutely an hour
I was
away.
like, I'm not going to be passive aggressive here. Like, I'm just going to tell you, like, this matters to me. And I think what I watched my parents do, and what I watch a lot of other parents do, is in thinking they're launching their kid, they don't prioritize the relationship. They don't say like, hey, it would mean a lot to me if you would do this. They don't use their words and say it, but then they want you to have thought of it or whatever.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's not how I'm going to parent. I'm going to say, you know what? Here's what I want. I want a deep relationship with all of us. Connor, I want you to move back to Dallas after college because your little brother needs you. And he's going to head into his next, 5 years either with a role model and a brother there at his games or not. And that matters to us. So I use my words. Now, if they felt called to the mission field, y'all better believe I would be their biggest fan and pay for the flight over there for them to get there. If they aren't called, I think family should matter more than a job or an opportunity or a cool city.
Well, and I think you just said something that speaks to family dynamics in general, just the clarity of communication and how a lot of homes can just be riddled with like silent treatment or guilt, without saying something. So you're right, that does build seeds of bitterness that grow into resentment that can be really big. And if it just had said like a more on a vulnerable level like you did, just say, "Hey, I just need you to know this hurts because I really want this to be priority. This is priority to me. I want," and it's not meant to be a guilt trip. It's meant to be vulnerable and honest. And sometimes I think if we say nothing, because I think you're right in launching them, you don't have authority, but you still want intimacy. And so I think sometimes parents can be tempted to be like, "Well, I don't want to say anything because like this is their life now and they're making their decisions and I don't want to impose." And yet that middle ground is still, you're still establishing a new normal, right? You are establishing a new normal of going to college and then a new normal of him now graduating. And it's still good to kind of have the rules of engagement, like conversation, like, "Hey, just so we're clear, like this still means a lot to us. We're not forcing this, but there's a deep commitment on both sides."
Yeah.
Well, and I thought of, recently our family, I love our family text stream. We always are, it's a good update for us. My kids don't do a lot of social media, so I don't see everything going on in their lives. And so I prioritized, I was like, listen, if you text on this family, this is when they're in college. If you text on the family text stream and you ask me for money, I'll probably say yes. If you don't text and you ask me for money, I'll probably say no. And I'm like that. I'm just saying this matters to me. And
Yes.
I mean, yeah, there's a little bribery, and no, I can't do that when they're adults. But I do think it's playful. They know I'm not bitter, that I'm not mad. I just want to
Yeah.
encourage things that bring togetherness,
Yeah.
and I'm working
Yeah.
on it.
All right. So I'm sure everybody listening would love to hear specifically how you and Zach determined like some of your policies around like social media, the phone. You've mentioned a couple times your kids just didn't really get on social media until a certain age, I would presume. And, Rebecca and I have done contracts with our kids, and we kind of have gone down a similar path. And like you, probably have never met a parent that said, "I wish I would have given my children social media and a phone earlier." We only meet the parents who are like, "I wish I wouldn't have done that so soon," but it's obviously so hard. But we all had to do it through these teen years where our kids and all their friends and all their friends' parents were saying, "Go for it." At least that's what the kids would say, right? All my
Right.
friends
All my
and
friends
my
are doing
parents
it.
are
They're
doing
like, well, maybe not every
it. So
single one.
how did you guys think through that? And what were some of the ways and maybe some practical advice for other parents that are struggling with that right now?
One of the biggest, I would say, commodities in our home has been trust. So they know that it's the currency. They know that when that is high, they get a lot of freedom, and when that is low, they get none. And that is a personal. It's a moving thing, right? It's something that's changing all the time. So I would say every single one of my kids got technology at a different age. All of them got social media and access to that at different ages. Um, and but I would say all of them, it was considerably later than their peers by years. And so when it was cool, and by waiting, let me just encourage the parents two things. Number one, by waiting, what happened to all four of my kids, and they've all articulated this, is as they watched their friends stare at their phones, they built their own convictions. So because there was a significant time between their friends getting their phones and them getting their phones, they were so bothered by how it changed their friends, and they were able to build their own convictions and concerns about technology just by sitting at a table and everyone's on their phone but them.
Yeah.
And so I think there is, even though they'll be complaining, at some point every one of them stopped complaining, and they were nervous to get it because they knew, okay, this is gonna, I'm probably gonna become that. So don't fear that stage, and help them see it that way. So I was always really clear about the trust thing. We trust you, but this isn't good for you. So it's not because we don't trust you, especially the ones that we did. This is just because, and I'd send them the articles. I'd show them the research. I'd say, this is what's happening. I'd show them the suicidal thoughts that teenagers are having. I'd show them all that. So they were building, in that time between the first kids getting a phone and them getting a phone, they were building already their own feelings about it. Then what's cool that I can say that not everybody can is I have older kids now that are thanking me and that are more
Yeah.
convicted about it for their children already than we were. So
Yeah.
they look back and go, "Thank you so much for how you protected us."
Yeah.
And that day will come because we all know it's dangerous. We all know it's not bringing us joy. So you have to think about that too, that that future kid is going to thank you that you protected them.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And you're right. The older they get, the more that frontal lobe is starting, that reason and logic and that self regulation. You just have a lot stronger chance. And it's been
Mhm.
interesting, the conversations. There was one night Pierce texted us a photo of like all his friends hanging out in his dorm. And so I don't want to out any of his friends, but it was more just like a bunch of people and everyone was staring at their phones. And he was like the one who noticed it. And of course, he would be one of those kids any night as well, but it was just a reminder that he noticed it. And we had just watched videos of us when he was home, I think over Christmas break, of us in college, and he's like, y'all just had so much fun together. You're always like at a dance party or you're cooking a meal and you had always a group of friends, you're always hanging out, and it seems so much lighter and whatever. And we're like, well, we didn't have a phone to actually contend with, at all in our college experience. And he literally got to see that side by side of like his
Mhm.
experience, of almost 30 years later versus our experience in college. And so I think what you're speaking to of them waking up to that is that pendulum is going to swing back, right? It's on some level to those who've kind of grown up with it. They go, wait, there's a levity when I get to release this. There's
Yeah.
a joy in presence. But
Well, Jenny, thank you for sharing your wisdom with us today and helping so many other parents like us navigate these years, but also think about this next season of launching that we all have to look forward to, and all the ways that we can be cultivating the right kind of environment for our family that's going to help that both be healthy but also be something we enjoy, and we don't,
Yeah.
as you mentioned, we don't regret those years of fearing it, but we look forward to it.
yeah,
So we love you and Zach, and thanks for
Love
sharing a
you
little bit
guys.
about your personal life and how you guys do it.